Welcome to Tanzania. Here we are at Ifakara Health Institute. We're going to be demonstrating some of the things we wanted to teach you on the medical entomology course. Unfortunately, I can't be there in person, so we've made a short training video for you. Here you can see our ambient chamber tests, our laboratories and our washing facilities from the air. And we're going to take you for a short tour around the different facilities to show you how we test different vector control products. We focus on bed nets and indoor residual spray. In order for a bed net to be considered a long-lasting insecticidal net, it has to withstand 20 washes. Therefore, in the laboratory, we conduct wash resistance testing. In this test, we will take a bed net. Ahmed is here demonstrating. Could you show us how you do the test? Samples are stored in foil in the fridge at 4 degrees before and after testing. Between washes, we keep them in the incubator at 30 degrees. Then we take that net, we put it into 500 milliliters of water, which contains soap. We use a palm-based soap. Some people use savon de Marseille, and we use 2 grams per liter. The net is put in to the washing solution, inverted 10 times, and then it's put into the incubator shaker bath, where it's vibrated and washed. So here we're demonstrating the shaking bath. It's just going to go on now. Then we time the shaking bath for the 10-minute wash. The nets are then taken out, put into clean water for a rinse, again in the shaking bath for 10 minutes. This is done twice. We're here at the Ifakara Health Institute Vector Control Product Testing Facility. We're here at a time of Corona, and this is why everyone is wearing masks. The first bioassay we're going to show you is the cone test for bed nets. This test is used to test whether or not a bed net can kill a mosquito or knock down a mosquito, which stops it from biting someone underneath that net. These are laboratory tests which are very high throughput and very cheap to do and don't involve human participants. Therefore, they're used during product development when new chemistries, new formulations and new fabrics are evaluated. And they're also used when bed nets have been deployed to the field for operational monitoring, so we can make sure that those bed nets continue to kill mosquitoes and protect people sleeping underneath them for up to 3 years after deployment. The way this test is done is mosquitoes are put into the cones, they are exposed for 3 minutes, then they are taken from the cones and put into these cups. In the cups they will be held then under optimum conditions of 27 degrees and 80% humidity, and they'll be monitored for 24 hours after the exposure time. Sometimes they'll be monitored up to 72 hours for some different chemistries. Now we have 3 technicians required to perform these bioassays because we need 1 person to siphon the mosquitoes into the cone test. 1 person will make sure that the mosquitoes are in there for the right period of exposure, 3 minutes, and 1 person will be monitoring the data and recording the data. So over to our team.
My name is Edgar Vera, my leader of this team.
My name is Ahmed Hakare, I'm a of the technician.
My name is Safina Sangoye, I'm a technician.
So let's get started. So Edgar is putting mosquitoes into the control first. This is done to make sure there is no contamination between the control and the treatment. He's very gently aspirating 5 mosquitoes into the cone to ensure that we don't actually skew the results by damaging the mosquitoes. He's been doing this for around 12 years, which is why he's highly skilled in this activity and can put the mosquitoes in without having to carefully put them in separate cups. He just puts them straight in. The mosquitoes used here are 3 to 5 days old. And they've been kept on sugar. We're using Anopheles gambiae here, which is the primary malaria vector in Tanzania. Okay, we're just finishing off the last control. And Safina's standing by with her stopwatch because we have to be very careful when we're putting the mosquitoes in the treatment to not exceed the 3-minute exposure time. Okay, so our controls are ready. And now we move on to the treatment. Now Ahmed is standing by. He will remove the mosquitoes when the 3-minute exposure is up. You might note that this board is made at a certain angle. It was actually work done at the Swiss TPH by P. Muller himself that showed that the 60-degree angle that we use on these boards is most appropriate. We also have cut out circles in these boards. This means that the mosquitoes have to stand on the net when they've been exposed. Because if they stand on the board, if we had a board for them to stand in between, put their feet through the holes in the net, then they might not have an exposure to insecticide. Also, you might note that we have these special bungs in the top, which are not very attractive for the mosquitoes to stand on. So we want to maximize the mosquitoes' exposure to the net of interest to ensure that we're truly measuring the effect of the insecticide. As you can see, we're working in the tropics and the lights are going off. Okay. So Safina's just called time on the control. Those mosquitoes have had their 3-minute exposure and they're coming out. So Ahmed is now putting the mosquitoes into their cups where they'll be held. We basically make conditions as nice for the mosquitoes as possible. We call it the mosquito hotel. So if the insecticide is killing a very strong, healthy mosquito that's kept under optimal conditions, then it's going to be even more effective under natural conditions of use. Therefore, this is quite a conservative test. And if the insecticide can pass this test, then we know it's going to pass in the field. In this way, we ensure that we don't get any products going onto market which are substandard and don't kill sufficient mosquitoes. At the moment, we're using a susceptible strain, but for many of the new products coming to market that aim to combat insecticide resistance, we use pyrethroid-resistant strains. The final endpoints are knockdown, which is measured at 60 minutes after exposure, and then mortality at 24 hours, or 48 hours, and 72 hours, depending on the chemistry. We're going to have a demonstration of that now. So Ahmed is going to score the mosquitoes that we exposed in the cone bioassay 24 hours previously to see what proportion of them have died. A dead mosquito is on its back, it's unable to fly, and we may also hold the mosquitoes for 48 or 72 hours for some slower acting insecticides such as chlorphenapir. So we're ready to do the scoring now. So Ahmed, can you demonstrate to us how we actually measure how well a bed net's working?
Start with the control. 0 day. Get 1. But get 2, 0. 3, 0. 4, 0.
So this is a good thing because we have to have our control mortality under 10%. So with none of the mosquitoes dead, the bioassay is okay and we can continue to record.
So we do treatment. All are dead. 5 dead. 5 dead. 5 dead. 5 dead.
So this is an excellent result. Here we've seen that all of the mosquitoes have died within 24 hours, which means that for a community sleeping under these nets, they will be very well protected. Both those people who are using the nets will be protected through the physical barrier that the net provides, but also even those who do not have access to a net and are not sleeping underneath a net that night will also be protected through the community effect. The dead mosquitoes are unable to reproduce and bite other people and transmit disease. And as we say, the only good mosquito is a dead mosquito. The final endpoint of the tunnel test is feeding inhibition, and we also measure 24-hour mortality and sometimes mortality up to 72 hours. So what we want to show with this test is that a bed net can prevent people being bitten if their arm is resting up against the net. Some kinds of bed nets, which contain pyrethroids such as permethrin, function primarily as a chemical barrier. So when nets get holes, like you can see here, then the insecticide continues to stop the mosquitoes penetrating those holes and biting people inside. This is a standard holing system devised by the WHO where you have 9 small holes around and then this one in the center. So we're going to put the net into the tunnel now, and then we're going to release some mosquitoes in there. We need an animal bait for these experiments, unfortunately. Now these rabbits are very well cared for. We take care of them under veterinary supervision. They have their own organic vegetable garden, and we use them only 1 time per week maximum to ensure that they don't get too much discomfort. You can see that their back has been shaved. So we release the mosquitoes into one compartment. The test is run between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. At 6 a.m. we come and collect the mosquitoes from inside of these tunnels, and we measure what proportion of those mosquitoes are fed and what proportion of those mosquitoes are dead. In this way, we can see for a longer holding time, a longer exposure period, how a net is functioning. So we're just going to put the mosquitoes in now. So the number of mosquitoes released in these tests is 100 per test. It's quite a large number. And then we are running at the same time a control and a treatment. For this bioassay to be valid, then we need to have 50% of the control mosquitoes fed and less than 10% of the control mosquitoes dead. But these mosquitoes need to be good and healthy, so they're actually selected by the ones that are most wanting to feed. So we sugar starve them for between 6 and 12 hours before the bioassay to ensure that they really want to take blood. We do that by removing their sugar pads from the cage. And we also select the mosquitoes that are most hungry by putting our hand close to the cage. So those mosquitoes that want to try and take a blood meal, you can see them actively trying to take that meal, and it's those mosquitoes that we release. It's important to do that to ensure that we get the minimum criteria of 50% feeding and to ensure that we have reproducibility between the results to reduce the variability. So I think we're ready to go now. Just ensuring that everything is well fitting, and then the mosquitoes are released. So these tests are started in the evening. The rabbits are kept in these wire burrow-like structures to keep them as relaxed as possible, and they'll be left quietly overnight without disturbance to ensure that we don't cause them any discomfort, other than the mosquitoes biting them, that is. So we're just putting this black cloth over the top to try and keep the rabbits as relaxed as possible. And that's a tunnel test. So in order to ensure that bed nets can have a long-lasting insecticidal net label from the WHO, they have to prove a 20 wash resistance under a natural wash condition. Similar to the experiments that we performed in the laboratory, where we washed the nets and then rinsed them twice using 2 grams per litre of local soap, a palm-based soap, we then scale this up and reproduce this same washing technique, but using entire bed nets. So the whole net is washed, this time using 20 grams of soap in 10 litres of water, and it's washed and then rinsed twice. The wash procedure is slightly modified. We use these large silver basins. The nets are agitated for 3 minutes through gentle stirring, allowed to soak for 4 minutes, and agitated again for 3 minutes before rinsing twice in clean water. After this procedure is completed and the nets have been washed and rinsed twice, they are hung up in a shaded place and dried flat. This procedure is then continued using the regeneration time of that net. So let's say a net fully regenerates after 3 days. Every 3 days we would wash that net for 20 wash cycles, and then only after that procedure has been completed, we would then use it for further testing, either through laboratory bioassays such as the cone test, or for full semi-field bioassays such as the experimental hut test. So here we are at the Ifakara Ambient Chamber Test, the IACT. This is an alternative to experimental hut tests. While experimental huts are the gold standard, they use wild populations of mosquitoes. So the experimental huts are located in areas of high vector density and getting on with their business inside of the huts, interacting with the bed nets or interacting with a spray that we'd applied to the walls of the huts. However, one of the problems with this is safety of the participants. It exposes people to disease-carrying mosquitoes, even though we minimize the risks using medical supervision. However, there's also another issue, which is the heterogeneity in mosquito densities. You tend to have some nights with very high densities and then many nights with lower densities, causing a huge skew in our data. Therefore, we have to run very many replicates in order to get sufficient power to discriminate between different products. With that in mind, we devised the Ifakara ambient chamber test as an alternative that measures in the same way as experimental huts. It measures the proportion of mosquitoes that die and also the proportion of mosquitoes that blood feed when exposed to an insecticide on a bed net. However, these chambers use laboratory-reared mosquitoes, allowing us to move through rapid numbers of experiments very quickly with excellent data power. Every night we release between 30 and 60 mosquitoes in a chamber, and this allows us to have the same number, the same high number every night, giving us excellent data quality. It also enables us to release different strains of mosquitoes, so we might release a susceptible strain and an insecticide-resistant strain at the same time. This enables us to see how the different compounds or insecticides on the bed nets perform against the different resistant intensities of the mosquito strains. This is very useful, so you can then use your results to say, well, maybe this net would be good in an area with low resistance, but it wouldn't perform as well in an area of high resistance. And all of this can be done very quickly and safely. Okay, so we're going to go into the chamber. So you can see it's made of white material. And it zips up. And this allows us to keep all the mosquitoes inside and find them very easily. And here you can see how the IHI operates. So again, we're working with Dixon, who is our volunteer for the evening. So he is sleeping underneath a net. So we either work with nets that are being evaluated for the first time. We do quite a lot of evaluation to see different doses on nets to find the right dose. And we also use these for durability studies. So nets come back from the field. They have been washed many times, they have many holes in them, and then we test them in this system to see how the fabric and the chemistry interact together to stop mosquitoes feeding and to kill them. So, Dixon, can you show us how you release the mosquitoes? The mosquitoes are released at 9 p.m. and at 6 a.m. the volunteers begin the collection. This allows the mosquitoes to be exposed for a similar period of time as would occur in either a WHO tunnel test or an experimental hut test. So the volunteers use a torch because it's generally dark when they're collecting the mosquitoes in the early morning. Then they use a mouth aspirator to collect those mosquitoes that have entered into the bed net first, taking special attention to ensure that they don't miss any around the mattress area. These mosquitoes are collected with a mouth aspirator and placed into a cup. So this is an Ifakara experimental hut. We use these to test new bed nets and indoor residual sprays in what we call semi-field conditions. So it's a controlled field experiment. So these are based on local housing design, so they have the same length, width and height as local homes. We have them thatched so that the internal temperature is similar to that of local homes. The areas where the mosquito enters are these ventilation gaps that you find in almost all African homes, where hot air rises and then flows out through these eaves. Now the mosquitoes follow the odor that humans emanate, so the smell from our feet as bacteria break down triglycerides on our feet emanates an odor plume which basically is perfume to the mosquitoes. So they follow this odor plume in, they bounce up the walls, and then they go into the hut. And so this is why we have these openings here, like local homes. And then after the mosquitoes have bitten their human host, then they tend to leave in the morning via the windows, and that's why we have traps on the windows. So these are raised up, so we're going to go up inside. They're raised up because ants love to eat mosquitoes. So the point of these tests is to kill mosquitoes using bed nets or indoor residual sprays. Therefore, we have to ensure that we don't get any ants coming in eating our data. Come on. So as I showed you before, the mosquitoes come in through the eaves, and so then we have these pieces of plywood here to prevent the mosquitoes getting back out again. So when a mosquito comes in, we can then recapture it. We either recapture it from the walls, from the floor, or in these window traps. Also, this is a bed net test, so we have our dedicated scientist, Dixon. Hello. How are you doing there? So these are tests where we actually test the interaction of the products with the human users. And so mosquitoes are breeding in the wild. They then enter into the huts and come in, and then they interact with a human underneath a bed net. So we cut holes in these bed nets here. This is a standard size hole dictated by WHO. And then we see how many mosquitoes are dead and how many mosquitoes are fed in the morning after collection. So now Dixon's going to demonstrate. He's waking up now and he's going to demonstrate how we do the collections in the nets. So the volunteers wake up in the morning and then it's usually still dark because they get up at 6 a.m. and they start collecting the mosquitoes by torchlight. We have 28 experimental huts. And to do a normal test with the power to detect a 10% difference in mosquito mortality between the different products, we'll need to measure for up to 80 nights. So we have very, very large experiments going on to measure differences between bed nets. And all of our team members have to be highly trained in how to collect mosquitoes. So can you demonstrate, please, Dixon, how we do it? Okay, so every mosquito that's recaptured, we don't know what species it is, we don't know if it's male or female, and so they're put into paper cups, then they're taken back to our field laboratory where they're sorted. We may even have to examine their DNA to be able to speciate them. This is obviously quite a dangerous job for the volunteers, and so they have to take malaria chemoprophylaxis when they're performing this work, because they're at an increased risk of mosquito bites than if they were, well, actually they're probably at a lower risk of mosquito bites than if they were at home, because net products don't come to us for evaluation unless they've gone through rigorous laboratory and safety testing. After the volunteers have collected all the mosquitoes from inside the bed net, they need to collect the mosquitoes from the floor to make sure that they haven't killed any or step on any that have been knocked down and kill them. After they have swept the floor, then they can start clearing the mosquitoes that are resting on the wall using this aspirator here, which is called a Procopac aspirator. This is a very neat device. It's basically a vacuum cleaner for mosquitoes. It's made from locally available computer fans and drain pipes and a broom handle. And so basically we then use this to suck the mosquitoes into a cup which is labeled inside, because we need to measure not only the number of mosquitoes but also where we find them, because we need to know if the insecticide is killing inside or if it's driving the mosquitoes outside. So in the early morning, after doing the collections first inside the net, then on the floor, and then on the walls, the volunteers will go outside of the experimental huts and start collecting those mosquitoes that have flown towards the light to leave the huts. These are window exit traps. You can see they have a letterbox shape, so the mosquitoes can fly in quite easily. They're funneled in, but then they find it very difficult to get back into the huts. So we get an approximation of the number of mosquitoes exiting the huts. The mosquitoes are again collected using a mouth aspirator and put in a separate cup labeled exit. So here we're demonstrating the human landing catch. In order to understand whether or not we've made changes to a mosquito population by implementing a bed net or indoor residual spray campaign, we need to know how many mosquitoes are about and how many of them are biting humans. Also, it's useful to know at what time those mosquitoes are biting and where, indoors or outdoors. So we conduct these human landing catches where the volunteers collect mosquitoes approaching their lower limbs. Then they catch them using these mouth aspirators before the mosquitoes are able to take a blood feed. This is a really important technique because it allows us to understand the amount of exposure, so that's man-vector contact, that we have within a population or a community. However, there are ethical concerns about this technique because it's exposing people to the very vectors of disease that we're trying to control. Therefore, it must only ever be performed when you have ethical approval and there is no other alternative means for sampling the mosquito population. In addition, it's advisable to do it under medical supervision, so the volunteers should be tested for malaria every week to make sure that they are not positive, and also provided with standard malaria chemoprophylaxis. While the human landing catch is probably the most objective way of measuring the contact between humans and mosquitoes, man-vector contact, we know that it's not the safest method of collecting mosquitoes. It's also very difficult for people to stay awake all night collecting mosquitoes that are landing on their lower limbs. Therefore, a number of different traps have been developed which can enable us to collect a lot of mosquitoes and get population estimates of their densities. And one of the best means of doing this is this CDC light trap. So this has a little lamp here and it has a little fan which then sucks the mosquitoes attracted to the light down into this catch bag. Now we place this trap at about 1.5 meters from the ground, so this is where the mosquitoes are entering, at the foot end of a bed net. So mosquitoes are attracted by the odors from the human feet. They fly in, but then they cannot get in. We tend to use an untreated bed net, and then the mosquitoes are in the area of the fan and are attracted to the light, and that's how we catch them. So that gives us not the best estimate, but a good enough estimate. And these are very scalable. You can hang them next to many, many bed nets in many, many houses and catch a good number of mosquitoes for estimates of things like the force of infection, so the sporozoite rate in mosquitoes. So what we want to show now is fabric integrity. When nets accumulate holes, mosquitoes can enter, bite people, and leave without dying. And also, when the bed nets get many, many holes, people throw them away. Then they have no protection from malaria at all. Therefore, informing the WHO on how long these bed nets last is a critical part of what we do. So, shall we start? All right. So this is one of our trial nets, so it's been labeled. I can feel from the material. Which material do you think it is? This feels like an ollie set to me. Yeah. Okay, so which way are we going? You going over there? Yep. All right. So we have this frame. We put the net over the frame. These frames we can take to the field. This is a demonstration one, but we do have very lightweight frames that can be broken down a bit like a tent and carried around in a backpack. Then the team will go to somebody's home, request informed consent, and then they will put the bed net over this frame and measure how damaged that bed net is. So I'm here with Dixon. We're going to show you how we measure the durability of bed nets in the field. So a durable bed net is one that is there, it's intact, and it's still got enough insecticide on it that it kills mosquitoes. So it gives a physical barrier, stopping mosquitoes getting in and biting, and also kills mosquitoes. Now, as I said earlier, you have to have a 3-year lifespan for these nets. And so you go out to the field to measure how many nets are still performing 1, 2, and 3 years after bed nets are delivered. So this is a net that has come back from the field. We have a demonstration frame here, but normally the field team will go out with a light aluminium frame that packs into a backpack. And then after getting informed consent, the team will go into the house, and then they will put the net over this frame and measure quantitatively the level of damage that net has incurred. And so this is done using something called the proportionate hole index, where you take 4 different hole sizes. So bigger than a finger, smaller than a thumb, bigger than a thumb, smaller than a fist, and bigger than a fist, smaller than a head. And this has been designed and actually is really quite a useful technique because it's easy to remember, it's easy to do in the field, and it gives data that's representative. Oh, we just have a passing motorcycle. It gives data that's representative of whether a net is serviceable or not serviceable. A net that is serviceable has a proportionate hole index of less than 642. And if it's serviceable, then it's still protecting. And the reason we use this frame is that nets tend to get quite a lot of damage at the bottom here. And this damage is caused by people tucking in their net. And so this distance here is from the hanging point to the mattress. And so any damage underneath here is actually not functional damage. However, one of the problems is people see a net looking like this with big holes in it, and then they throw it away. And then there's no net there at all to protect. So, shall we do some hole counting? Yes. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, let's go. So I'm going to tally the holes as Dixon counts them. Okay.
Size 4. Size 1.
Okay, so I will then, oh, you're going to the roof, thank you. Now we're going to demonstrate indoor residual spraying, which is a vector control tool that is highly efficacious. Long-lasting residual insecticides are applied indoors, inside of homes, so after mosquitoes have bitten people sleeping inside of those houses and rest on those walls, they get a toxic dose of insecticide and die. This is a very effective tool because the mosquitoes are killed and then the entire community is protected. However, when you are applying a pesticide, you have to ensure that the workforce is protected. And so we have to wear personal protective equipment, or PPE. So here we have Dixon. He's wearing an overall which has to cover all of his skin. He's wearing gumboots. He wears a respirator. He wears a wide-brimmed hat to ensure that no residual insecticide gets over into his eyes or down the back of his neck. And he will also wear gloves to ensure that his hands are protected. So you can imagine when you're going into houses in the tropics wearing all of this equipment, it's an extremely difficult and arduous task. So I think we have to be very impressed with the dedication of people who apply these important life-giving, life-saving tools day in, day out throughout sub-Saharan Africa and beyond. So the insecticides are applied using these pressurized sprayers. So now we're going to see the original sprayer, the Hudson knapsack aspirator. This is what was used for the first malaria elimination campaign, and it hasn't changed since. You can see it's very heavy, it has one strap, and you're carrying around 10 litres in the back of that. You can imagine it's very, very cumbersome to operate. You can even see, even our experienced operator here is having quite a hard time with it. We also now have a new sprayer, which has now just come out. This is the first innovation in indoor residual spraying technology for the past 50 years. And it's not really that big a difference. So you can see on the newer product, which has come from Goisper, this is a plastic aspirator. It's much lighter, it's easier to carry, and it has 2 straps. So you can put this on your back much more easily. And when you're walking between houses and spraying for hours every day, then this is actually a very big benefit to the team. So it's still a bit cumbersome though. I think you need to be quite tall to be one of these spray operators. So now you can see on the end, we've placed a wire guide. Now this guide keeps the spray fan, the spray nozzle, you can see this yellow nozzle at the end, 40 centimeters away from the wall. This is really important because we need to apply the insecticides at the right dose. And in order to get the right dose, we have to control the flow coming out of the sprayer through using a combination of the correct pressure, which is 55 psi inside, and a ceramic nozzle on the end, which keeps, even when the pressure is lowering, it keeps the flow rate coming out. So it's called a control flow valve, because we need to apply the insecticides at the right concentration. So these spray tanks are designed to take either 7.5 or 10 litres of water. So the spray operator will then add the insecticide into the tank and then need to pressurize to 55 psi. This is also quite a physically demanding job, as you can see. You have to pump this machine up to 55 psi. Oh, he just needs to pressurize the tank correctly. It's overpressurized. So different insecticides are applied at different concentrations. Here we're going to spray with just water for safety reasons, because this is a demonstration only. Therefore, we're ably assisted by Frank here, who is an alumnus of the course, who is going to show how you do spray training for IRS. Because in order to get the target dose, you need to spray at the right timings. So for every 2 meters, you have to take 5 seconds to do that. So one of the most critical things in any spray program is that many days have to be taken just practicing spraying to ensure that you get it right every time, to ensure that the correct target dose is reached. So for instance, Actelic would be applied at 1 gram per square meter. So you can just imagine now we've put 10 liters of water in that tank there, and then we've applied the Actelic bottle into that tank, and now we're going to start spraying. How did it go? It was a bit too fast. Oh, tutafanya tena. That was 5. So by repeatedly doing this spray, sometimes people like to sing a song that lasts for 5 seconds. The team gets used and gets into a rhythm where they can apply the insecticide at the correct dose until it becomes like second nature to do it. So in order to do all of our laboratory bioassays, like the cone test and the tunnel test, we require thousands of mosquitoes. So in our insectaries, we rear around about 2,000 mosquitoes every day of each of our different strains. So you can see here some of the adult colonies. We keep them at 27 degrees and we feed them on cow blood through a membrane to make sure that we don't have any transmission of disease. However, once in a while, we do also feed them on human blood to make sure that they still retain a taste for humans, because we need to know that the mosquitoes are responding in a real and natural way. So this takes an awful lot of space to rear all of these mosquitoes. And here you can see our larval room where we have all of the different bowls with the larvae in them. You can see the eggs on filter paper. They're put into the water here. Then they emerge into L1 larvae and go through to the stages L3 and L4 that you can see here. And finally the pupae you can see in this cup. So these pupae have to be removed and then they're put into the adult cages where they can emerge. So here you can see one of our technicians, Mzee, feeding them the mosquitoes sugar. They use sugar to have energy to fly and to reproduce. The mosquitoes take quite a lot of care. We keep them in what we call our mosquito hotel. They have to live in very, very clean conditions. We have to clean everything daily with bleach to make sure that they don't have any parasites in their bodies. And we also have to give them clean sugar, blood every 3 days. And then after 8 days in colony, we kill them to make sure that there's no possibility they could live long enough to transmit malaria. However, by that time, we've used most of them in experiments. The majority of the mosquitoes we use are 3 to 5 days old for comb tests and 5 to 8 days old for tunnel tests. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you have a good idea and a good impression of how to test a bed net and how to test an indoor residual spray and how to apply an indoor residual spray, and maybe a flavour for the incredible amount of work that goes into generating data for evaluating these kind of life-saving interventions. I hope to see you in Basel, hopefully in the coming months, and I wish you all the best in your assessment.